Hear these words from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 men with a skin disease approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? So where are the other 9? Did none of them return to give glory to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Thanks be to God for this living word. Amongst the greatest lies that this nation tells about itself is the one of its discovery. It's a lie, of course, because that story begins with Christopher Columbus's journey to the Americas, discovering something that had long before been discovered, inhabited, and tended to by people who had long histories, rich cultures, and deep faiths. And it's a lie that this nation continues to tell itself, and a dark past and present that it refuses to reckon with. Replacing the holiday that celebrates Columbus with Indigenous Peoples Day does not rectify all of the wrong that was done, but even that small symbolic act is still to this day under attack. Now, while I'm sure that my own education on Columbus in elementary school was different from yours, especially if we're in a different generation, but I still have to admit that the education that I received did not tell the whole story, especially the parts that painted him and other European settlers in a negative light. It's an odd feeling, isn't it, to be an adult and to continue to learn more about history that directly contradicts the story that was first handed to us, piecing together the nuances and the complications and the ugly parts of our past that still inform our future. Part of that lie was a story about adventure. I was told of, or at least imagined, a Columbus who traveled the globe out of a desire for discovery, sort of like a scientific expedition, or who at least thought of his adventure as a sort of treasure-seeking endeavor. And that may all honestly be true to some extent, but a vital piece of the story of Columbus's journey was absent from my education. Even when I came to learn of his brutality towards an enslavement of the indigenous people of the Americas. And that piece was his religious fervor. Columbus was motivated by his apocalyptic beliefs in Jesus' second coming, to travel the world to fulfill what he saw as modern day prophecies that were in the Bible. In Columbus's theology, in order for the day of the Lord to arrive, Jerusalem had to be reclaimed by Christians, the Garden of Eden had to be rediscovered, a worldwide leader had to be established, and the Christian message had to be proclaimed throughout the whole world. Now, those ideas about ushering in the end times were not out of place in Columbus's day. These were inspired, of course, by misreadings, mostly of the book of Revelation. But Columbus saw himself as central to these prophecies and believed that it was his own actions that would lead to Christ's return. His journey was first meant to bring Christ to the Eastern world, but his discovery of this new land indeed may have felt as though he had come across the lost Garden of Eden. Columbus was so invested in this belief that he asked the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, who, by the way, were his chosen new worldwide emperors, to use the profits of his expedition to fund a crusade to take back Jerusalem. This theology of his emboldened Columbus, who truly saw himself to be central, the central figure in this prophecy, to freely take from these new lands that he had discovered and to enact the horrific acts that he did. This land had everything that he had dreamed of in his apocalyptic imaginings. He had discovered, in a sense, the new Jerusalem. He had found Eden. He had found the wealth that was necessary for the crusade. And two, he found the last people that were needed to convert before the end days would arrive. In her book, Immigration and Apocalypse, Yi-Jen Lin does an excellent job of documenting how this attitude was not actually unique to Columbus, but fueled many of the Protestants who left Europe to colonize America. Many of them saw the New World as an opportunity to build the utopia that they dreamed of, which was often interpreted through theological and often apocalyptic lenses. These theologies were oftentimes competing with one another. They were varied from one another. They didn't all, for example, share Columbus's obsession with retaking Jerusalem. But you only have to look at a map of the United States to see towns named Bethlehem, Zion, Bethany, and yes, even Eden, to see that this theology was at the heart of the colonization of this land. This land was the New Jerusalem to the first European settlers, and they directly used the Bible to justify and shape their new colonies. Lynn points out in her book that they especially borrowed the symbolism from the book of Revelation to frame their project. And that, of course, includes things like the walls and the gates that are described in Jerusalem, or the bureaucracy that comes in reading the book of life, which allowed them to keep out the undesirables out of these, what they saw as heavenly colonies. And like Columbus, many of these Protestant settlers saw themselves as directly enacting the prophecies of the Bible, making them out to be the chosen people of God, sort of like the Hebrew people entering into the land of Canaan. This theology provides the framework for American exceptionalism. Any number of actions can be excused when God is on your side. It's an undeniable truth that we are a nation of immigrants. But that truth has always been obscured in our discourse. These first settlements, in their mind, weren't really immigrants, but they were the chosen people of God. The land really belonged to them. And then once they got there and got comfortable, suddenly they were somehow native to this land, never mind the real native populations. And other outsiders who would come, other immigrants, became dangerous, be they Irish, Chinese, African, or even just if they came from where we came from, but they were Catholic. By and large, the theology of the first Protestant European settlers in this country was not an outsider one, but one based on a belief of superiority and centrality to God's will. It was a theology that made outsiders who were unclean, unrepentant, and unlike us excluded to protect the chosen. And it is a theology that has continued to this very day in both religious and secular contexts, blatantly expressed in the fear of the outsider as corrupting, violent, and predatory. All of this stands in contradiction to the reality of immigration that this country was built on. Yet when we look into the Bible, we see a very different theology presented. We see time and time again that God sides with the outsider, and God often calls the least expected to play the greatest role in the story of our faith. The narratives that we're more likely to read are in the Bible are those of people who are displaced, actually, for some reason, often because of violence or hardship. Stories like that of Ruth, of Joseph, of Hagar, even the child Christ and his parents. Jesus continually in his ministry calls us to see the outsider in our midst and the faith of the least expected. The story that we read together from Luke 17 is no different. 10 unclean men walk away from Jesus, healed from skin disease, but only one returns to offer his thanks to Jesus for changing his life. When Jesus says, "We're not 10 made clean, where are the other 9?" He's not genuinely surprised, but is making this into a teaching moment. It is the outsider, the one foreigner, the Samaritan, who is the only one who has returned to praise God. Take a good look, everyone, Jesus says, at this real example of faith from someone who you would most likely look down on. And while Jesus did live in a very different world from ours, without modern borders, without modern immigration laws, the man in the story did likely face great hardship as an outsider. We probably know Samaria most from the story of the Good Samaritan, which that alone tells us exactly how Samaritans were usually thought of in the day. And Jesus flips that script on its head. And this man was, in a sense, doubly unclean, both through his skin condition and also through his nationality. Yet he is the singular one to return to give Jesus thanks. In my time on this earth, I have found that it is often those with the least that are the most grateful. Excess can breed our entitlement. But some of those who have gone through the greatest scarcity and hardship are those that are most grateful for the things that we take for granted, and are often the most generous in the little that they do have. This is the attitude, I think, that we see in the Samaritan that the other 9 lack. They assume their healing, but the one who returns does so out of faith, out of reverence for being given such a great gift. And Jesus only continues to give as he centers this man before others, honors him as an example of faith. The Spirit is not held by borders or boundaries, but breaks free of constraints to dwell within the least expected. God's love is found in the outsiders. And so we are called again and again to go to the outsiders like Jesus and to lift them up, learning in that process a greater picture of the God that we serve, taught through perspectives we cannot have alone. We are to extend hospitality to the stranger, choosing to live by love and not fear. That contradictory theology of Columbus lives on today, as our immigrant neighbors are being rounded up by masked ICE agents who terrorize innocent families, rip people from their homes, and patrol our streets as though there is some great threat hidden just beneath the surface, the unclean corruptors hiding in the shadows. And the supposed chosen people, the immigrants who became native, often characterized by whiteness, are said to be under attack. Even Christianity is said to be in danger from this outside threat. But those with beloved immigrant neighbors in our own neighborhoods, in Chicago, in Portland, all across the country, know that these so-called outsiders who have often seen such great hardship do carry the image of God. They carry God's love with them. They are our friends and our family. At the last count that I've seen, there have been 10 faithful members of the Church of the Brethren who have been detained by ICE and 11 who have been deported. These are our brothers and sisters, as are all who have been whisked away from their homes. These are God's children. It may seem small, what I'm about to say, in the face of the brutalities inflicted upon immigrants in this country, but I do encourage you to consider making a donation to the Legal and Mutual Aid Fund to assist immigrants that's been set up by the Church of the Brethren. Unfortunately, the reality is having enough money for a lawyer can make all of the difference when you are targeted by ICE. And if you'd like information on how to donate, if you haven't heard about this fund, feel free to reach out to me. But I'll also be sure to put that information in the update this week. When we welcome the outsider, when we embrace the immigrant, we do not do so because we are the chosen hands of God in some inversion of Columbus's approach. No, it's because we are to adopt the mind of Christ, which was that of the outsider, even in his own nation. The Son of Man had no place to lie his head. We are to be a peculiar people like Christ in whatever land we find ourselves in. We are to live into the words of Jeremiah to the people in exile, even when we find ourselves peculiar in the place we are. To this displaced people, Jeremiah says, seek the welfare of the city where we find ourselves. Pray on its behalf, for in its welfare we will find our welfare. Let us seek the welfare of this world and all of its inhabitants.